Truckers and the open road a recipe for terror. For some, it represents freedom, but for the truckers who haul our goods through the dead of night, it can be something else entirely. A breeding ground for horror. Tonight, we delve into the dark side of those endless highways. We're going to explore 5 terrifying tales from truckers who encountered the unexplainable. Chapter 1. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. It was a moonless night, the kind that swallows even the brightest headlights, making the road ahead seem like an endless void. Rain lashed against the windshield as Frank, a seasoned trucker with years of experience, rumbled down a desolate stretch of Highway 41 in Montana. The rhythmic pounding of the rain was almost hypnotic. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, a lone hitchhiker waving frantically by the side of the road. The figure seemed almost ghostly in the dim light. Frank hesitated, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. He had heard stories about picking up strangers, but the road was lonely, and the figure looked desperate. But something in the hitchhiker's desperate eyes urged him to stop. Those eyes seemed to plead for help, and Frank couldn't just drive by. The hitchhiker, a young man named Billy, claimed he was stranded on his way home to Bozeman. His clothes were soaked and he shivered as he spoke. Something about Billy's demeanor struck Frank as odd. There was a strange, almost otherworldly quality to him. He was overly quiet, his gaze darting around the cab as if he was searching for something or someone. Miles turned into hours, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the occasional splash of rainwater. Frank tried to engage Billy in conversation, but the young man offered only clipped responses, his mind seemingly elsewhere. As they approached a desolate stretch of road, Frank glanced over at Billy, intending to offer him a cup of coffee to break the silence. But the seat beside him was empty. Billy had vanished without a sound. Frank slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding on the wet pavement, his heart pounding in his chest. He swore he'd just seen Billy a moment ago. The young man couldn't have just disappeared. Panic clawed at Frank's throat, his mind racing with possibilities. He ripped the truck door open and rushed out into the rain, but there was nothing. No sign of Billy anywhere. No sign of Billy. No footprints in the mud. It was as if he had never been there. Shaking, Frank returned to his truck, his mind racing with questions and fear. What had just happened? Billy was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving Frank to wonder if he had imagined the whole encounter. Frank knows one thing for sure. He'll never pick up another hitchhiker as long as he lives. The memory of that night would haunt him forever. Chapter 2. Terror at the rest stop. The lights of the rest stop flickered like dying fireflies. Inside the diner, a lone waitress wiped down the counter. Sarah, a trucker, felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine. She ordered a coffee and a slice of pie, her eyes scanning the room. The man, his face obscured by a greasy baseball cap, sat shrouded in shadow. As Sarah ate her pie, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She hurried out of the diner, her hand trembling as she fumbled with her keys. The man followed. Sarah's heart hammered as she heard the heavy thud of his boots behind her. She quickened her pace, her breath catching in her throat. She practically threw herself inside her truck, slamming the door shut, just as she heard the man's ragged breathing behind her. From that day forward, she vowed never to stop at a deserted rest stop again. The memory of that night stayed with her, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks at the edges of the road. Chapter 3. Whispers on the Haunted Highway. They called it the Devil's Backbone, a treacherous stretch of Highway 160 in Nevada. Jack, a young trucker on his first solo run, scoffed at the stories. The sun dipped below the horizon as Jack's rig rumbled onto the Devil's Backbone. As darkness enveloped the highway, the temperature in the cab plummeted. The radio erupted in a cacophony of static and distorted voices. And then he heard it. A voice, soft at first, then growing in intensity, whispering his name. "Jack! Jack!" His blood ran cold. The whispering continued, swirling around him. "Turn back! Get out while you still can!" Panic clawed at Jack's throat. The truck's headlights flickered, casting grotesque shadows. For a fleeting moment he saw her, a woman in a white dress, her eyes burning with an eerie light. She reached out towards him, her hand a skeletal claw. Jack slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding on the asphalt. When he looked up, the woman was gone. The whispering had stopped. Jack drove through the rest of the night. The memory of the whispering voices and the ghostly woman seared into his mind. He emerged from the devil's backbone as the first rays of dawn pierced the darkness. He never spoke of his experience, but the memory of that night stayed with him. Some roads are best left untraveled. Chapter 4. Vanishing Point. The case of the disappearing convoy. The Nevada desert stretched before him, a seemingly endless expanse of sand and scrub brush. The moon cast an eerie glow over the landscape, making the shadows dance and flicker. Mike, a veteran trucker, felt a shiver crawl up his spine. He had driven this route countless times, but tonight felt different, almost surreal. He was heading south on Highway 375, better known as Extraterrestrial Highway. The name alone was enough to send a chill through even the most seasoned drivers. As he rounded a bend, his headlights illuminated a strange sight, a convoy of trucks, at least a dozen strong. They appeared out of nowhere, like ghosts materializing from the darkness. The trucks were spaced evenly apart, their running lights cutting through the darkness. It was an almost hypnotic sight, the lights moving in perfect unison. Mike adjusted his CB radio, hoping to catch a word of chatter from the other drivers, but all he heard was static. The silence was deafening, adding to the growing sense of unease. He tried again, his voice echoing through the empty airwaves. "Breaker 19, this is Big Mike coming up on your tail." Silence. "Breaker 19, this is Big Mike coming up on your tail." Silence. The lack of response was unsettling. The trucks were moving at a steady pace, but there was something mechanical about their movements. It was as if they were being controlled by an unseen force. As he drew closer, he noticed something even stranger. The trucks, despite their lights being on, seemed to be completely empty. The trucks, despite their lights being on, seemed to be completely empty. No drivers behind the wheels, no drivers behind the wheels. It was as if the trucks were driving themselves. A shiver ran down Mike's spine. He had heard stories about strange occurrences on this highway, but he had never believed them until now. He slowed his rig, his mind racing. What was happening? Was this some kind of elaborate prank or something more sinister? The lead truck in the convoy approached a turnoff in the distance. It was a dirt road, little more than a pair of tire tracks leading off into the darkness. It was a dirt road, little more than a pair of tire tracks leading off into the darkness. Mike watched as the truck, followed by the rest of the convoy, vanished into the darkness. Mike watched as the truck, followed by the rest of the convoy, vanished into the darkness. One by one, the trucks disappeared, their lights winking out like dying stars. One by one, the trucks disappeared, their lights winking out like dying stars. The road was once again empty, as if the convoy had never existed. Mike continued down the highway, his eyes scanning the road ahead. The memory of the vanishing convoy stayed with him, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved. The memory of the vanishing convoy stayed with him, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had witnessed something extraordinary, something that defied explanation. Chapter 5. The Ghostly Passenger. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the desolate landscape. The storm was relentless, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. David, a long-haul trucker, drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, trying to stay awake. The rhythmic tapping was his only companion on this lonely journey. He was on the final leg of a long haul, a cross-country trek that had taken him through countless towns and cities. As he rounded a bend, his headlights illuminated a figure standing by the side of the road, a hitchhiker. David hesitated, his mind racing with cautionary tales. He had a strict no hitchhikers policy, a rule he rarely broke, but something about the figure's hunched posture tugged at his conscience. The rain was merciless, and the figure looked utterly forlorn. He sighed and pulled his rig over to the shoulder of the road, the decision weighing heavily on him. The figure, a woman, hurried towards the truck, her movements quick and desperate. David leaned over and pushed open the passenger door, the cold air rushing in. She was young, with dark, wet hair and eyes that shimmered with an almost otherworldly intensity. Her presence was both unsettling and intriguing. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice barely audible above the roar of the rain. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment. David grunted, waving her into the cab. He couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and unease. "Where are you headed?" "Ohio," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Cleveland." The name seemed to hang in the air, heavy with unspoken stories. David's eyebrows shot up. "Cleveland? That's right on my way." It felt like more than just a coincidence. She offered a weak smile. "Yes, a very small world." Her smile was fleeting, almost ghostly. As they drove, David couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The atmosphere in the cab grew increasingly tense. The air in the truck had grown heavy, the temperature dropping despite the heater blasting on high. It was as if the cold was emanating from her. He glanced over at his passenger, but she seemed oblivious to the change in temperature. Her silence was unnerving. He opened his mouth to ask if she was feeling all right, but the words died in his throat. She was gone. The seat was empty, as if she had never been there at all. So there you have it. 5 terrifying tales from the open road that prove, even in our modern world, some things remain unexplained. The next time you find yourself cruising down a dark highway, remember these stories. Remember that the open road can be a lonely and unforgiving place, and that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are best left undisturbed. If you enjoyed tonight's descent into darkness, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on future tales of terror. And as always, thanks for watching.